This is one of the few games where I have played this at every single player count with every single module and expansion and option, including solo mode, before reviewing it because I like it that much. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Foundations of Rome from Arcane Wonders, and while I probably saved you a whole lot of time in my opinion with that opening, it may not be a game for you, especially with the price point on this game, especially with how expensive it is to get your hands on. Foundations of Rome is a game worth finding out whether it's a fit for you and your tastes. Foundations of Rome, this is the deluxe Kickstarter version of the game, which I believe is currently the only version of it available. I don't know their plans on bringing it back to Kickstarter or not. I hope it shows up. People seem to like it. Short version of this game is it's a polyomino city building game. It's a game which you're going to be building out your polyomino pieces, and by pieces I mean these gigantic, ridiculous 3D miniatures or whatever it is, these sculpts. These are miniatures. This is a miniature polyomino game. This particular version of it is sun-dropped, so it has that sun-dropped effect on it, but this is a city building polyomino game. Your turn is pretty simple. It consists of one of 3 actions. That's all you do. Round and around you go until you finish out the age. Rinse and repeat for 3 ages. That's the entire game. What are the 3 things you can do? You can either take money. You either take 5 coins plus 1 coin for every commerce building you've built. You can look at your board at a glance and see, hey, I've built a bakery. I'm going to get an extra coin, so I'm going to get 6 coins instead. If I have this on the board, well, I have built the foundry as well. That's going to be 3 plus 1 plus my 5. That's going to be 9 coins. Whenever you take the take coins action, you get 5 coins plus 1 for every single building. Secondly, you can go ahead and pay those coins you spent your time getting to go ahead and buy a deed of land. You can buy any one of these deeds of lands, and in return, once you get that, you'll take G6 and you'll place your marker on G6. I have the board already set up, so that part's a little harder, but you're basically going to take a marker, take a deed marker, pay for a deed, put the marker on the board, and you've locked in a plot of land. Then the plots will slide downwards, and that's effectively the clock on the round, because once one of the 3 piles, the deeds at the beginning of the game, you're going to start the game with 6 deeds each to give you a bit of a predefined starting. From there, the deeds will be divided into 3 piles. You'll have different sized boards based on the player count, and then as the deeds run out, that will trigger the end of the age. So you can sit there and say, hey, I really want that F7, it's going to cost me 8, or I could gamble on the fact that if I do other things in the meantime, that'll probably creep down to a 4 and I'll still be able to buy it. Or maybe somebody to my left buys it for 6 coins instead before it gets down that low. So there's always a trade-off, always a bit of a push and pull, because your money is not unlimited in the game, and you have to try to figure out the most efficient way to get what you want. The third action, and the reason to have deeds, is so you can actually sit there and put a building onto the board. As your deeds create little sections, or the sections of 1, a 2 section, as you have a 4x2x2 for a 4 section over there, as you create sections, you're going to have the ability to put buildings on the board in those spots. So you can go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to remove these 2 from the board. Let's go ahead and put a 2 population building on that spot, and then bump my population up by 2 on this tracker. So you're going to be putting buildings on the board, buildings that come in one of 3 primary types. You'll have your commerce buildings, which gives you more income every time you take an income action. You have your population buildings, which will move you up the population track and be a big part of the consistent scoring across 3 rounds. You're going to score for population 3 times during the game. And then lastly, you have civic buildings, which all score based on what they're touching. Civic buildings will be looking for buildings next to them, yours or your opponent's, and saying, hey, I'm next to a bunch of residential buildings, I'm next to a bunch of commerce buildings, I'm next to any buildings, or I'm next to other civic buildings, and give you points accordingly. And then, and this is my favorite part, you can replace buildings. Part of the game is going to be the fact that when you take a build action, if you have buildings, you can build over them, assuming you build a larger building. To give you an example, right over here, I have a 2 building and a 3 building. As long as you build larger than the largest building you're replacing, meaning I'm replacing a 2 and a 3 with a 4, I can go ahead and do so, and then replace that empty lot gets turned back into a marker. I put these back on my board, and now I've just changed up the board, and that's incredibly important because of the fact that other players are building based on what you do. Other players are putting down little civic buildings to score points based on adjacencies to yourself. And so when you have the opportunity to sit there and undo those adjacencies, to say, hey, you like being next to residential buildings? Oh well, this just became a commerce building. To mess with your opponents as you play through this game, that is a huge part of the experience. And that's basically the core game. You're going to be going through the scoring mechanisms every single round. At the end of every round, you're going to go look at the scoring. You're going to score for population. You're going to get some points for your economy buildings as well. Your commerce buildings sometimes give you points. You'll be scoring for your civic buildings. Rinse and repeat across 3 rounds, and that's Foundations of Rome. But there's a whole lot more going on. You see in this box there's a ton of modules, starting off with the Monuments expansion. The monuments expansion gives you this over here. This tray, which is falling over as I tilt it towards you, this tray of monuments over here giving you a bunch of more monuments, more shapes, more structures, each with their own stack of scoring cards. You're going to have their own stack of scoring cards that will apply to these buildings, giving you different ways. A 9 population building, that's insane. We have the Temple of Mars. Some of them come with requirements, but then give you other things as well. We have the Forum Romanum, which is going to give you 2 points for every single money building it's next to. You're going to have all these different extra things, and they generally have 2 differences from your standard buildings. The first is that anyone can build them. Once you have them in play, you'll be having a certain number based on the player count in play. Once you have them in play, any player can get to them first. So as opposed to my own buildings, which I know I can build my size for a building whenever I want, these ones, they're a bit of a time limited because if I don't build it, you might. Additionally, they tend to be a little bit more efficient than other buildings, giving you a drop more of a return compared to the same size it takes, making them, well, attractive. And then lastly, they come in different shapes from the original buildings, or some of them come in different shapes, giving you more ways to, well, first of all, make the board look amazing, but also just to put things down on the board. That's going to be the monuments expansion. Then we have the objectives. Objectives over here are going to give you either private or public objectives that give you 8 victory points for achieving certain thing. The fewest number of buildings, the fewest civic buildings, the most size 2 buildings on the edge of the board. You're going to have different options, different goals you're going for, either playing with them publicly or privately, or if you really want, you could even do both, having some public and some private goals, giving you options to get 8 points at a time, which can be huge in a game that I find typically goes between 100 to 130 points. Getting 2 or 3 8-point bonuses, that's a huge chunk over there. You'll also have the player role expansion. The player role module is going to give you different roles you assign to the player at the beginning of the game, giving you philosophical. Whenever you construct a monument, you gain 2 victory points. Very helpful. Try to only use that with the monuments expansion, or it's not really helpful. You have fortunate. You start the game with an additional 5 coins. Strategic. Each time you construct a civic building, you gain a victory point. Each of these gives a player a different competitive advantage, a way they are different and special, and something else to go with. From there, we have the I can't remember what this is called, the incidents, the events. It's basically called the events, but in my head it's not called the events, so I'm pretty sure it's called something else, but the event deck. The event deck is going to have 3 of these shuffled into each of the 3 ages. You're going to take from this pile over here, you're going to select 9, you're going to take 3 in each age, shuffling them out, and then they will enter the board and can be bought just like any other card. When you gather those, they will either give you points at the end of the game if you don't use them, although usually I recommend using them. Alternatively, they give you options as far as when you discard the card, when you trade in the card, and for what effect. Building 2 buildings at once, taking multiple deeds at once, forcing other players to give you coins. These give you another thing to be bidding on, in addition to the deeds you have, giving you a few more turns in the game at the same time, because they will inherently lengthen the course of the game. And then lastly, the last expansion is that the trading and stealing module. Trading and stealing is trading and stealing, but you could do trading or stealing, you could do both, you could do either, you could do none. Trading and stealing is going to allow you to trade lots with other players. In addition to the fact that you're buying lots, I can sit there and say, hey, 2 wood for your sheep, or in the case of this game, I'll trade you 2 coins, and I'll also give you one of these cards I just got. You could trade these if you're playing with these, and you go ahead and give me that lot, and I'll swap locations with you. You're going to start bartering with other players, which will help you because the players left out of the barter are not doing well. The players who are bartering are both improving their board state. They're both doing their thing, and yes, you can make deals, and yes, they are not binding. If you do that, I will definitely not replace my residential building with a commerce building. You absolutely can. You know, that part of the deal is not binding, but maybe you won't because you want to be trusted the next time you play this game, or you want to be trusted even this time you play the game. Stealing will give you 2 points that you can use, 2 tokens you can use to steal from other players. That twice during the game, you can steal a lot that is adjacent to one of your buildings. You get to take it over, but it's only twice, and the other player does get the token, which is going to be worth 4 points to them, and was worth 2 to you. In other words, it's a 6-point swing with the person you're trading from, which could be huge, but also they're going to be able to have the opportunity to do that to others as well. Every player is going to get 2 of those tokens, which allows for a limited number of stealing, enough for chaos, but not so much to be completely crazy and have some degree of control over the game. And those are the modules you have with Foundations of Rome. Let's talk about the game. Ease of play. The game is amazingly easy to teach. Amazingly easy. The most complicated thing is kind of understanding that whole aspect of replacing buildings. The actions are very simple. You take money, you buy a deed, you build a building. That's all. There's very little nuance or depth to what's going on in terms of the pure strategic options on the table. They are straightforward, they are clear, they don't have a lot of complexity. The rules around replacing your own buildings, how you can replace them, when you can replace them, replacing parts of your building with lot markers if you overbuild in different directions. There are some fiddly aspects around there, but a tiny amount of fiddly liveliness. If we're not talking about the expansions, I can get someone up and running with this game in 4 or 5 minutes. And speaking of which, this game sets up in 3 minutes. Not like roughly 3 minutes, but I'm saying 3, but I really mean 5. I'm saying start to finish, you time me, I can get this game running up and running in 3 minutes, and sometimes 4 minutes maybe if I have to shuffle out the wrong cards from other players. I've timed myself on this. This game, despite the huge box size, and it is a huge box size, it sets up incredibly quickly because every player has their own player tray. Tier down is not that bad either. Assuming players are doing their own thing, they're helping. Tier down with other players helping will also be 3 to 4 minutes. If I'm doing the whole thing myself, it might be 10 minutes. This is an incredibly easy game to table, to get up and running, to get you started off from start to finish. From the moment this box is at the table to the moment I am ready to play is generally 3 minutes, which is incredibly impressive, especially considering the amount of bling you have in this game. As far as player count, it's a 1 to 5 player game, with expansions to be clear. Default game is 2 to 4 players. There is a solo mode and there's a 5th player expansion. I have played at all player counts, including solo. As far as all those player counts, let's go ahead into it right now. I do not like the solo mode. I don't. To be very transparent, I've only played the solo mode once, and I played it with mistakes that I caught halfway through the game, so take it with a grain of salt. But even then, I just don't think the solo mode is for me. I didn't find it to be as rewarding as I typically find Foundations of Rome. 2 players, very solid. 3 and 4, definitely my preferred player counts. 5 is still fine. The game moves pretty fast, but you don't have a lot of control over the deeds for sale. That trade-off of, let me see if that F7 gets a little cheaper, it's less present in a 5-player game because of the fact that it may not get back to you. There's less likelihood of getting back to you. I've gone back and forth whether 3 or 4 is my best player count. Both of those are amazing. 2 is solid, and 5 I'll play, but is my least favorite from those, excluding solo. Solo is my least favorite. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, I mean, just look at it. This is one of the most visually delightful games I've seen in a long time. No, that does not make it a good game. That absolutely does not. Then again, there are many other games that look amazing and aren't that good. It's not the looks alone, but the looks certainly help. It gives you that extra sense of immersion to the experience. At the end of the day, this game, I mean, I hope for accessibility stance that they come up with some sort of, pure cardboard shit version that other players can play this using the same kind of concept, but much cheaper without that. I hope they do, so that others have the opportunity to dive into it. But I do think this enhances the experience. No different than smell enhances taste. This board presence and the fact that it doesn't even come at the cost of how easy it is to table. If anything, I think chips or whatever it is, cardboard tokens, I think those would be harder because of the fact that they're likely not going to come with a premium tray, which means you're going to be pulling them from a bag and they'll be less organized. Maybe they'll come with a tray, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what their plans are or how they're going to do anything or whatnot. This definitely adds to the experience. There's no question. It does not make it a good game. It makes it a better game. The setup and tear down, like I told you already, is amazing. The fact that you have all of this and it doesn't affect the setup and tear down. This is one of the faster games I have to table. It is incredibly rewarding to do so. It's incredibly fast to do so. Again, I don't time myself when I set up games. Not generally. I've done so with this game because I want to see just how good are these player trays that they promised, and they are amazing. They really make this game ridiculously easy to table. And then the modularity. The game offers you a very simple way to dive in. Play the base game, no complexity. There is strategy, we'll come to that, but the base game is incredibly accessible to just dive into it. Versus the modularity this game offers is huge. The fact that you can play with objectives, with the monuments, with the trading and stealing, with the player roles, with the event deck. All of these different options give you a ton of different ways you can mix and match in different options in order to give you the experience you want. If you don't like trading and stealing, great, don't use it. If you like trading but not stealing, don't use it. If you don't want the extra complexity of having a few monuments on the board, leave them out. You like the player roles, not the objectives, that's totally fine. Every single one of these gives you a different way to play the game, while also giving you the flexibility to not play with it at the same time. So there's a lot of modularity to that experience. Additionally, the ability to play this game casually versus strategically is huge. This is a game where you can simply set it up, table it, don't be too cutthroat, focus on having a good time, and you can introduce this to whoever you want. But I can also sit down across from the most hardcore gamer and tactically try to outmaneuver them on this board because there is strategy to the game. The way you build things out, what you choose to pay for something. If you have trading and stealing, it adds a whole level to the interactions you'll have at the table. But just the very fact that I know that as I build, I will also be overbuilding. I will also be deconstructing and changing the nature of the board. And the fact that you know that I know that, there is a lot of complexity here. There's a lot of strategy and there's a lot of opportunity to really mess with other players, to find those perfect moves, to tempt them with a solid building that will give them a bunch of points, and to know full well that you are going to replace that, to get that monument before they do, to use the event that's on the board. There's a ton of different things going on here, and there's a lot of strategy to the experience. This game is simple in its accessibility, and it allows you to play it simply, but it also allows you to play it incredibly cutthroat at the same time. As far as what I don't like, Higher player counts does lead to less control, but lower player counts leads to less interaction. It's a small little nitpick, it's more commentary on the player count, but I kind of like the 5-player experience in terms of having that much stuff on the board, having that big a board. This board over here is double-sided. Each time you'll have different areas of the board that are off limits depending on the player count. Having the size of the 5-player board gives you a lot of opportunity, especially when you combine it with the trading and stealing. That part is a lot of fun. But I don't like how the card row, the deeds for sale row, doesn't have as much control over it, so I lose a little bit from that. 2 players is incredibly quick, incredibly tight, lots of control of the deeds for sale, but you don't have as much stuff going on, the board's not as large. 3 and 4 has definitely been my sweet spot. I like the size of the 4-player, I've gone back and forth which I prefer. I am always happy to play either of those player counts. The objectives. I'm not a fan of the objectives when they're public. When they're private, I'm okay with them. When they're public, I'm not. Private objectives, to a certain extent, give you something that you're mindful of, other players aren't, and it's not something you're publicly fighting over. I'm trying to get my objective, and that's it. Either I get it or I don't. When they're public, it adds an extra element that I don't always love, especially because of the trading, especially because of the overbuilding aspect. Many of these objectives rely on having the fewest types of buildings, or don't have that, have more of this, and because you can change the state of the board when you build over things, it does mean that you can lead to these last turn pivots where, very last moment, the last action of the game, you try to reduce or complete or tear down a building in order to get one of these objectives, which lends itself to the game still being strategic, but less fun as I find myself completely tearing down things, but for different reasons, because these are 16-point swings. If you get it versus me, that's a 16-point swing. So I don't know if I'm in a rush to play with the objectives in a public form again. I would play with these privately, happily. I'd probably still try with them publicly at some point, but it's certainly my least favorite from the modules, specifically objectives when they are public. And then I wish the monuments were a drop cooler. I wish the monuments were a little bit cooler in what they do. Right now the monuments are more efficient and they give you a few more sizes, but I kind of want more from the experience. Right now most stuff comes down to either points, money, or the residence. One of those 3 things, either your population, your points, or your money. Everything else, there's nothing really else going on. There's no intricacies when it comes to the monuments. There's no details as far as extra things you can do. Discounts you can have on buildings, buying deeds for sale. Like, I don't know what you can and can't do. I feel there's more opportunities for more cool things with the monuments, because right now the monuments add to the game. They are nice. I don't think they're essential, which, if you watch my unboxing of Foundations of Rome, I said that they're essential. I've since played this game without monuments to try it out, and I think the game is just fine without the monuments. I was wrong with that. But the monuments, even though I like them a lot and will always play with them, I wish they did a drop more and had a drop more interesting stuff. Right now, every time I've dived into the monuments, I enjoy them. I'm happy to have them, but they feel samey. They're just more efficient and give you some extra changes to the way they'll take up space on the board. Again, fun, solidly fun. Wish they did a bit more. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, the size. This is an intense game. This is not a game I'm bringing to game night, or at least not often. This is a game I will sit down, I will table it at my house, I will get it played, but I'm unlikely to bring it over to your house. While the setup and teardown is amazing, the box size is intense, and so it's not a game that's going to travel well, which does in some way limit its accessibility. Additionally, there's lots of min-maxing in the game. At least if you're playing strategically, there's a lot of counting of, well, if I play this, I'll put this one down, I'll get 6 population, that will move me up here, it'll be a 7-point swing with you, that's probably worth it, but at the same time, if I put this civic building down here, it's instead going to get me 9 points there. If I replace this building, I'm hurting myself by 2 points, but I'm hurting you by 4 points, and you're currently the leader. There can absolutely be a lot of counting as you try to figure out the perfect move based on math. If that's not your thing, then you may enjoy this still casually, but it means you will be operating at a disadvantage against somebody who's trying to play it with that math in the back of their head as they play. As far as final thoughts and rating on Foundations of Rome, I really like this game. Like, really like this game. It's not a perfect game, not by a long shot. It has a huge box. It's harder to table. It's not hard to table. It's harder to transport and travel around with. It is a game that has a cost that makes it a barrier to entry, and it's a game that is still relatively on the simple side. Simple not in a bad way, but this is not some complex heavy Euro, some intense dungeon crawler. It can absolutely be very strategic, but it does cap out as far as what the game does. It is very, very accessible, very variable, incredibly beautiful to look at, and satisfying to play and to table with. It's a game that everyone I've played with it has so far enjoyed it and has found themselves compelled to dive back in. I do wonder how many plays something like this is good for. I'm already like 8 or 9 plays deep, and I don't know. I don't know where it caps out. At what point do I get bored of the simple putting your buildings down, going for the same basic bonuses of residence, of commercial, all those facts? At any point, does this get a little tiring for me? 20 plays in, 30 plays in, I don't know, but for right now, I am really, really solidly engaged with the experience. The fact that it's accessible at different skill levels, the fact that it's so variable, it just is an incredibly satisfying, incredibly well done game from Arcane Wonders. This one's a 4.5 out of 5 for me. I really like it. It's just satisfying, and I do believe that rating would be lower if not for the bling. Absolutely. If these were cardboard tokens, I can see this coming in at a 4 easily. These do enhance the experience. Looking down at the creation on the board in front of you, looking down at what you have built together despite being at each other's throats the entire time, this is a very, very satisfying experience. A solid game that I can easily recommend, with the caveat that it's expensive and make sure you know you want it. As far as other game recommendations, if you want something that will give you a lesser level of bling, but still something that gives you a similar feel, Cathedral is a game that gives you another 3D polyomino kind of game. Very, very different in its implementation. You cannot compare the two as far as what they're doing as far as gameplay, but it can give you a taste into the kind of experience you are looking at, especially if you manage to track down Cathedral World, which I think is out of print and incredibly hard to get your hands on, but will give you those 3D buildings in a very, very different way. And then secondly, and this is not going to be a polyomino recommendation, is Parks. Parks is the only other game that I generally recommend from a stance of how simple, accessible, visually delightful it is to look at, incredibly engaging to newcomers and strategic players alike, with the opportunity to play it casually or the opportunity to play it cutthroat. Both this and Parks are very, very accessible and stunning in their own separate different ways. Granted, Parks is significantly cheaper. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.